Are you developing a .NET MAUI application and at some point something is not rendering as you expecting? For example, something is rendering behind or on top of another element, or it's misaligned, or it's not rendering at all. And finally, you use the background color property to understand what's going on. Probably you have been in this situation, and today we're going to talk about the DebugRainbow library, an open source community library that will help us to manage this kind of situations. Have you ever been developing the user interface of a NET MAUI application and something is not rendering as you expect? For example, in this case, in my application, I have a test is rendered right here that is not appearing. I'm sure you have done something like this more than once. You have gone into the user interface code and set a background color, especially on containers, to see what's happening. In this case, the problem was very simple. The test was used here, but the color of the test was used the color of the background. A problem that we can solve very quickly. Well, there is a library called DebugRainbows created by Steven. I have spoken well username. It's a very well-known member of the Xamarin community that helped in the past to creating a lot of useful libraries for Xamarin Forms projects. For example, in this case, this library is a port of the exactly same library existing in Xamarin Forms, but also maybe you remember libraries like PancakeView existing before the world appearance of .NET MAUI, where today we have some stuff like the border control, which allow us to apply any type of shape to the border, apply any stroke with different formats, different, for example, thickness and more possibilities. And today we also have things like shadows in .NET MAUI. But then in the Xamarin Forms times, we only have the frame control, which only allowed to set a simple get value. So this library allowed to create different type of strokes, shadows, formats with different corners, etc. So today we are going to put the focus on DebugRainbow, and it's a library which will allow us to solve problems that we have seen similar to what we have seen before. How it's working? Well, DebugRainbows allow us to directly apply a random color to each of the views that we have rendered in our application, or we can even apply, for example, helping lines for drawing on top of our user interface, giving information about the spacing and determining easily if we have any problem related with margin, spacing, or sizing of our views. For example, this is a demo application where we have these helping lines that we are going to use to solve some problems. Before we start to see how to use this library in our applications, we'll quickly see how it works. And let's take a little bit of time to see the code also. So we are going to Visual Studio, and we are going to start by taking a look to the library. The library is based on a main class called DebugRainbow that have some properties that we will use later in the onDraw method to in every platform. For example, in the Android view, we are going to use the onDraw method to take the canvas and use some extension methods from the canvas to draw lines, for example, in this case. Something similar happens in the library to implement exactly the same in the rest of the platforms. And when using the library, the only thing that we need to do is include a NUGGET package called plugin.maui.debugRainbows, supported in iOS, macOS, Android, and Windows, like we have here in our application. Then we need to go to our MAUI program class, for example, here in the sample, and use the extension method, use the DebugRainbows extension method. Within this extension method, we have a class called DebugRainbow options that allow us to define what we want to do. The two main properties are showGrid and showRainbows. ShowGrid allows us to draw the overlay, this grid above our application showing all the elements and all the lines that will help us with the alignment of the element of the user interface, while the other property, show rainbow property, will show a random color for each of the views that we have available in our application. Once this type of property is defined, we can directly customize everything. We may also not use any parameter, directly use the DebugRainbows extension method. And in that case, what will happen is that we are going to use the show rainbow property to true by default. So that is, it won't show the grid with the auxiliary lines. It will paint a random color on each of the views. However, if we want to use the grid, there are a lot of properties that allow us to customize how the grid will render. We have a property called grid line color that allows us to define the color of the lines. We have another property called grid line opacity to define the opacity of the line, grid line width to define the thickness of the lines, etc. So in turn, we have an enormous amount of properties to define the origin of padding, for example, between each of the lines. We have, for example, the grid origin that allows us to set whether it is rendered in the center, from the upper left corner, or use the grid paddings that will allow us to use a thickness type property to set whatever we want to be spaces to the left, to the right, etc. And then we have even more properties for grid personalization. For example, different coloring for the thicker lines from the thin ones. Well, there are a lot of options. So now let's see how to use this library in our own applications. For this, let's move to an application, a sample application that I have already ready, called chat application. It is a chat application that I'm going to run on an Android emulator. It's a very simple application showing the latest chats, and we can just navigate directly to each of the conversations and see all the all the message and be able to send message, etc. We will directly step by step take all the steps necessary to use the library in our application. As we saw before, what we have to do is in our project dependencies add a NUGget package, and we are going to look for the DebugRainbow. We have different options given that we have, for example, the XAML reinforced version, but what we are going to use is the port to MAUI, that is plugin.maui.debugRainbows. We are going to install the package, and once added, we go to our MAUI program class, where we set up our MAUI application. As we have seen in the library documentation, we use the DebugRainbows method, that is the one that we are going to use now. Let's use it. Remember, if we use the DebugRainbows method directly, it's enough, and we are going to restart our application. Of course, we directly use the correct namespace, plugin.maui.debugRainbows, and when the application is launched, we are going to see the result. So the library is drawing for us a random color in each of the views used to compose the user interface. This way we can see the composition and the size of each of the elements. For example, each of the cells where we have different, for example, a grid with different columns, we can see directly the size of each of them. Here we have 2 rows, the size of each of them, and like with this will work in case of routing in detail, and we can see the entry visual structure of our application. However, as we have seen before, we have some configuration options. We can choose the library options to set different properties. For example, may not display the random colors and display the grid with the helper lines. So we can use the show rainbows to false and show grid to true. Then we can just customize the grid origin, for example, to the center. And we can also customize, for example, the spacing, color, or other properties to manage how to render the thicker lines, the thinner lines, etc. So if we compile again and launch our application in the emulator, now we have the lines that we can customize in different ways. Let's see it. So in this way, we can detect exactly some problems related with the spacing. For example, we can see that each of the elements from the list, all the chat conversations are aligned, but for example, the search button is not aligned. We can, for example, to detect exactly how much misaligned it is, we can just modify some of the properties, change the grid origin, check the item size of every line, the spacing between lines, and launching again, it helps us to detect layout problems. So here we can see that all the elements following this line are, as we said, and we think before, that they are perfectly aligned, but the search button is not aligned with the left padding. So it's aligned also, it's misaligned also vertically. If we see all the elements of the horizontal list, so it's also misaligned. Of course, we can still interact with this interface, and we can see exactly that we have a problem here. It's not aligned horizontally, it's not aligned vertically. So we will have to change the position of the element, moving it upward and leftward. This way we can detect visual problems in a much simpler way. So, and likewise, if something rendered as or something is where we don't expect, remember that we can just draw a random color on each of the views to detect if one element, for example, is rendering on top of other, or if one element have an unexpected size, or any other similar problem. And we get to the end of the video. I hope that the content has been useful for you. If so, remember to like and also to subscribe to not miss notifications when new content is released. See you soon!